rejected me, not wanted to have me on. She's not black. Candace ain't black. But then suddenly you have a candidate, a presidential candidate, who quite literally put on political blackface. We bust her in all of these lies, and nobody keeps that same energy. Like, what kind of blackness are they actually guarding? Is it blackness, or is it just the Democratic Party? That's what I'm beginning to wonder. So I want to show you, when I got fired earlier this year from the Daily Wire, there were so many black hosts who were just like dancing on my grave, like thinking that I wouldn't be successful ever again, and making up all of these conspiracy theories. And one of them was that I somehow knew I was leaving the Daily Wire. I didn't. And that was the reason I had just done Joe Budden's podcast. Like, Joe Budden randomly shouted me out on his podcast. I instantly responded, and he had me on. There was no move there. There was nothing being planned. And then the same thing with the Breakfast Club. Like, I would have loved to do that show for years and never invited me. They just happened to invite me after I did the Joe Budden podcast. So I did 2 in a row, and then I leave the Daily Wire, and the next thing you know, they're trying to drum up some conspiracy about me, like trying to blackify myself, as if I have to do that. Spoiler alert, I'm already black. I've been black every single day of my life. I have not even taken a 10-minute recess. I have not been like, let me just chill for like 5 minutes and not be black for a second. So it's so ridiculous and never warrants a response. But it does today, because I wanted you to compare and contrast Shay Shay's attitude when he addresses blackness, when speaking about an actual black person, and then when speaking to a person who's just wearing blackface. So here he is. Listen.
My mother, she understood that there is a community that she wanted her children to be raised in. Mm-hmm. And she was very intentional and purposeful about that. And so I always say to people, even when I took the stage as the nominee for the Democratic nomination, that, you know, there is the family that you have by birth.
Okay.
And there is also the family you have by love.
No.
And they're equally family.
Yes.
Right?
No.
And I learned that from my mother.
No.
So my mother, I had all these aunties and uncles. My Uncle Sherman, who was one of the first black men to graduate from Berkeley School of Law, who, when we were young girls, sat us down and taught us how to play chess because Uncle Sherman said.
Yeah. Yeah. Just lapping it up and accepting whatever she says. Why? Because he doesn't have an original thought in his brain, and it's been mandated to him that the definition of blackness is basically enslaving yourself to the Democratic Party, even when you have someone who is quite literally wearing blackface. And for clarity, in case you are just jumping into this series, every single person that she just named there, her auntie Chris, her uncle Fred, her aunt whatever, Shelly, none of those are her actual aunts and uncles. She admitted that in her book, if you read the fine print, that they weren't her actual aunts and uncles. But that's her experience with the black community. And she's essentially saying to Shannon Sharpe, yeah, I'm going to keep blackfacing this because my mom told me it's cool. And these are my aunties and these are my uncles. And that's that. That's just how family works, except that's literally not how family works. And so I just want to say, Shannon Sharpe, if you're watching this, and I'm sure someone will cut it so you can see it, you're a disgrace for that. You really are a disgrace for your treatment of somebody who's actually black when weighed against your treatment of somebody who has been wearing political blackface simply because she wants votes from people that she perceives as stupid. And by the way, you are playing the part there, Shannon Sharpe, of being an idiot. Yeah. Oh, I was talking about Candace Owens. By the way, shout out to the people when he was disrespecting me. If you go to those comments, him and the woman he's sitting across from, everybody came down on him and were just like, no. Just because she does not agree and go with the crowd, you don't get to disrespect her and say that she's somehow putting on like I don't speak to black people. Absolutely ridiculous. But I had to vent about that because when I saw that clip, I was like, I know he's not really out here doing that. And yes, he actually is. So Club Shay Shay, you are Club Nay Nay in my book. You absolutely, you suck for that. But I will say to you, because I'm always open to having a conversation, I will have a conversation with you. You've never invited me. How could a person who never invited me onto their show make that statement? Is it not just absolutely ridiculous? Anyways, moving on, because I do want to jump back into her actual genealogy, not her aunties and uncles that aren't aunts and uncles and yup, Club Shay Shay, but like the actual uncles and aunts who she never mentioned, who are very white or very Jewish. And I have just been completely confused about this Miss Christie. We've talked about her in the past, but I really want to hone in on her because I'm telling you, I was just on a spiral today going, okay, nothing is making sense. Okay, so just to remind you, obviously, Christie is the person who was the biggest inspiration in Donald Harris's life. Instantly a red flag, spoke to a relative of his. I told you that back when I spoke to one of Donald Harris's half siblings, and they said that they had never met Miss Crishy, who would be their grandmother. She got one sibling who's like unbelievably close and being raised by, and the other sibling, same grandparent, and never heard of them, doesn't have a picture in the house, and realized that is actually remarkably suspicious, that they don't actually know their own grandparent. And so I decided to look for clues in his essay, and just reminding you, he told us that his roots go back to Miss Crishy, that she was formerly Christiana Brown, so presumably she got married, and he says right out, is honest about the fact that she is a descendant of Hamilton Brown, who is on record as a plantation and slave owner and the founder of Brownstown. He was a nasty piece of work, extraordinarily racist, whipped the crap out of his slaves, and fought so that slavery would never end. He did not want the abolishment of slavery, and he went to England to fight it at every regard. He was known to be particularly vicious and abusive. What's really interesting is that Snopes was trying, when people started realizing that she descended from slaves, and yet she's walking around talking about her being African American, Snopes tried to write a piece in defense of Kamala Harris that actually further substantiates that Christiana Brown, in my view, doesn't actually exist, or at least that's not her name. So they wrote this in 2019. The title here is, Did U.S. Senator Kamala Harris's ancestor own slaves in Jamaica? And directly from that piece, they write, we have not yet found a record of a Christiana Brown being born to Mary Melvina Brown. Such a record would establish a link between Donald Harris's paternal grandmother, Christiana, and the Antrim slave owner, Hamilton Brown. As a result of this absence, we are issuing a rating of unproven until such evidence emerges. So they're basically saying we can't find who she was born of. He's telling us, they're basically saying Donald Harris is a liar, right? We can't find the record, so we're saying that it's unproven. And for whatever reason, I guess he would want the street cred of saying that his relatives, his ancestors were slave owners. No, obviously not. He's obviously telling the truth. This woman, who knows what her name is clearly descended from Hamilton Brown. And yet when we did this chart, so I want you to take a look at this. When we did this chart, first and foremost, I just want to let you know, there is incest guaranteed. There's no question that Hamilton Brown was both Mary Melvina's father and the person that she married. It's very strange. She either married her brother, who might have been Hamilton Brown Jr., or she married her father. That part's unclear, but there is definitively incest. Everybody has pointed that out in emails, and I'm not going to make a big whatever about it, because it's just like, okay, we're talking about the 1800s, and I don't think it's really going to make or break people voting for her. It really doesn't have anything to do with her, but there's incest, no question. And what they're basically pointing out, Snopes, is that she's allegedly supposed to be the child of Mary Melvina Brown, but they can't find that in a record. Instead, someone seems to have produced a fake birth record saying that, well, her mom's name is Mary Ann Brown, but that would not make her a descendant of Hamilton Brown. So that's problematic. If she's got a mom named Mary, it's got to be this Mary Melvina Brown. And every time we tried to look and piece her in, and this is supposed to be, again, Donald's grandmother, we cannot find this woman anywhere. So I said, you know what, let's pull that chart back up. I said, let's take a look at the actual confirmed descendants of Hamilton Brown, like the people who we can find their tombstones, some of them literally say, like, the son of Hamilton Brown. Like, it's very clear. You find their obituaries. You, again, also suspect that we have all of these people that we can find obituaries and tombstones for, but we can't find anything about Miss Crishy, who was just this huge influence on Donald's life. Like, who is this grandma? Is he pulling the Kamala? Is he like, hey, if you feel a connection and an affinity, you could just be like, that's my grandma. That's my grandma. Which is just wild, by the way. Quick pause. Like, what are we even talking about? Like, I had close family friends. I actually was really close with a woman named Bernadette, who was like a second mom to me. Can I now run as an Irish president of the United States? This is wild. This is crazy talk. Of course you can't. So we took a look at those relatives who had tombstones and had obituaries. And I said, actually, in the Kingston Gleaner, they always tell you who attended the funeral. And it's interesting because we keep seeing Oscar Brown Harris as a pallbearer. He would have been like 30 years old. And we still can't find Christiana Brown anywhere. So I'm going to show you Edwin Brown's obituary, because there's a couple of things that are super interesting about it. This is his obituary. I want to say he died September 15th. Maybe it's like 1939. I have it written down somewhere. I don't have it here. But it tells you who is at his funeral. You can see up there who the pallbearers are. It tells you that you have the Misters C. Brown and D.A. Brown. Those are the brothers of the deceased. That all checks out. Stanley Brown and Oscar Brown, which are listed as cousins, which would imply that Mary Melvina had a sister, or Hamilton Brown had a third sister. It was totally incestuous, and they birthed Oscar Brown. That is very strange that he's being mentioned as a cousin when he should be mentioned as a nephew. And I do think that family line had a lot of incest, and that could be the secret. But if you keep looking at that obituary, what's also interesting is when you look down, there is a mention, I believe it is in this one, of look at the bottom there, a couple of lines up. It says Christiana Rose, okay? So we were interested in that. And also next to Christiana Rose is Beryl Harker. Let's just remember that Beryl is the Grandma Beryl. We're looking for Grandma Beryl. So I said, okay, let's take a look. Could this be Miss Chrissy? Could this be the Beryl that we're looking for? And it's like a dead end. It's like a total dead end. When I look up Christiana Rose, it is very apparent that she owned land. So that would check out, because the woman that we're looking for, far from this depiction that she's potentially just some mixed person and Hamilton Brown raped a slave, which I felt like they were trying to make us think. She obviously was legitimate, okay? Because Oscar Brown is attending these funerals. You don't just rape a slave and then invite the product of that child to be the pallbearer. And beyond that, we know that she owned dry goods stores. She was engaged in politics. This is not some illegitimate child. Christiana, in the way that he describes her in her piece, was a descendant of Hamilton Brown, not an illegitimate person, and she owned land. So when we found Christiana Rose, I started thinking maybe they just made up the name Christiana, full stop, made up a name Christiana, showed a picture of this woman to make people think that, Kamala potentially is mixed somewhere along the line. I am fully of the belief that the photos that have been shown of the grandparents are completely faked. Not faked as in the photo of the individuals are fake, but that they are not the people that they purport them to be, that Kamala is just adopting people. Maybe that woman was like a grandma, but that's not her real grandma. So is Christiana Rose her real grandma? We don't know, because then we can find virtually nothing about Christiana Rose other than the fact that she received property from her father, who seems to be one of the original people in St. Anne as well. Also of interest, and this could be a potential lead, is that same Edwin Brown obituary that we're looking at. His tombstone says son of Hamilton Brown, and it also says of Pedro Farm. And that's the first time that I had recognized that, of Pedro Farm. It allows us to put at least some coordinates on the map, and we're continuing to research and say, okay, well, if we're looking for a family that was running Pedro Farm, we should be able to find some names. We should be able to find some names within the Kingston Gleaner. So we found that today. So we're just now exploring that lead. The other possibility is if they made up this name, there's got to be a reason they made up the name, right? And I never felt that woman was married to Joseph Alexander Harris. Joseph Alexander Harris, we know he's a Syrian Jew. He looks exceptionally sharp and dressed in his photo, like his father looked and his father's father looked. And it didn't feel like the right vibe. Well, something that was of interest is I was like, let me look up in the Kingston Gleaner and see everything that I can find about Joseph Alexander, because maybe they're just hiding who he actually married. Maybe that's the big secret. Maybe it's a big incest secret. Maybe Oscar Harris is the product of incest, because, he went by Oscar Brown Harris. Maybe two siblings got together, and what you really have is that he is just the product of a mom and dad that are also sister and brother. Maybe. So I started crawling through the Kingston Gleaner, looking to see what I could find about Joseph Alexander. Again, Joseph Alexander is supposed to be the person that had a child with Miss Chrissy, and that child is supposed to be Oscar Joseph. And what we did uncover was this entry. It's a notice. Now, this is going to look strange to you, so I'll just tell you, because the first time I saw it, I thought it was weird. But if you had a wife or a spouse that left you, you had to publicly post it in the newspaper, so that you would not be deemed responsible for their debts if anything were to happen. And this person, who is Joseph Alexander Harris, writes, my wife, Carolina, or published rather, my wife, Caroline Verolita Harris, having left my home, care, and protection without my knowledge, I hereby warn the public that I will not be responsible for any debts that she may contract. Signed, Joseph Alexander Harris, on June 27th of 1934. Now, that could be a different Joseph Alexander Harris. We did find another potential Joseph Alexander Harris, but we haven't been able to verify that these are not just completely fake records, because every person that's listed in that family tree doesn't have a tombstone. It's like someone just made birth records. And as I've learned from Donald Harris's family, that's very easy in Jamaica, especially for them. It was easy because they were establishing the town. But then he said, even later on, him growing up, all you had to do was go down and bribe someone, know somebody down at the office and be like, hey, can you make this? And they could make that stuff on the spot. So finding a birth record is not convincing for me. And that was actually rightly pointed out by Snopes, that the birth record that exists for Christiana doesn't make any sense. There's no father listed, and there's a Mary Ann Brown that doesn't actually exist, and it has to be Mary Malvina Brown, but we can't find a birth record from Mary Malvina Brown having birthed Christiana. So birth records in Jamaica at this time and way forward into the future are just not reliable. They're not reliable. And so, but what I feel is reliable are tombstones. It's a little harder to fake that, to bury someone. I'm not saying you can't, you certainly can, but we could not establish, it almost seemed like someone created another Joseph Alexander Harris, and we don't know if that's the right person, if this could be the person that they're hiding, someone that he did marry, or if that's a different family tree. That's where we're at. Christiana is driving me absolutely insane, and so I wanted to open up to the public about it, because what ends up happening is when I get stuck on something, then one of you guys emails me, and it's like, poof, a breakthrough. And so I was like, why am I driving myself crazy? I'm going to